Greenville 911, what's your emergency?
I need to talk to someone. There's a bag on my door and I got a threatening note on my car.
Okay, there's a bag on your door?
I don't know what's in it, and then I got this note off my car.
All right, I'm going to send an officer out.
Yes, ma'am.
April 7th started off as any normal day on day shift, and I heard the call go out. When I met Officer Odom, he had a bag in his hand. Officer Odom said, "Amber, you need to see this." And when he opened it up for me to see, I said, "Scott, are these toes?"
The bag contains a severed hand and a severed foot.
Up until that moment, I had never seen anything like this before, only in movies. I was just astounded by the gruesome nature of this.
Murder is a horrible crime, but there are some murders that display a level of evil and a level of depravity that are rarely seen, and this crime is one of those.
My name is Collis Flavel, and I work with the Greenville City Police Department. I was in investigations for 19 years, and 16 of that was in homicide.
This is Flavel.
It was early morning, and I had just got to work when we got the call. An individual by the name of Sue Bostic noticed a black trash bag sitting outside her front door, and she found a note under her windshield on her car.
People understand what looks suspicious and which just doesn't look right, without anyone having to explain that to them. When she saw that bag on the porch, a garbage bag perfectly centered in front of her door, it immediately alarmed her. Somebody put it there. Whatever is in it is probably not good. Then when she sees a note on her car, it further alarms her, knowing that that note has got to relate to this bag. The note says, "Grace, this is your last warning. This is what happens if you don't follow instructions."
Okay, got it. I'm on my way.
Flavel has two things to answer at once. Who is this person that lost these body parts? And more importantly, who is Grace?
If there was a case to solve, if Collis Flavel was on it, it was gonna get solved.
When I arrived, two patrol officers, Officer Odom and Officer Drummond, were at a patrol car where they had this black bag on the back of the car.
Hey, Drummond. What are we looking at here?
You won't believe this.
Had you ever seen anything like this before?
In my career, I've never had a case like this before or after.
Let's get forensics out here now.
When dispatch calls you and says, "We've got body parts in a trash bag," no doubt that was going to be one of those things that I personally wanted to respond to.
You said you got body parts?
The toes have been clipped clean off.
What?
What are we getting ourselves into here?
The hands and feet were brown skin, almost looked like it was surgically removed. It was very clean cuts. There wasn't a lot of blood in the bag. Obviously, it happened somewhere else.
You have evidence of extreme violence. Someone is hacking up a human body, forcefully removing the toes, cleaving a foot off at the ankle joint, cleaving a hand off at the wrist joint. For what purpose? To make a threat? Well, it's working. That's an awful threat.
Gosh, I remember my prayer was, I hoped the victim had died at this point. I hoped that they didn't feel pain.
Whoever lost their hand and their foot could not have survived that. you'd bleed out in less than 2 minutes. This is a homicide. The question becomes, of whom, and where is the rest of them?
Let's have a look at that note.
The note itself was bizarre. It was addressed to an individual by the name of Grace Davis, basically threatening Grace. We learned that Miss Bostic is Grace Davis's aunt.
The implied content of the note is, do what we demand or this will happen to you. In addition to that information, there is an email to respond to at the bottom of the page.
For us as investigators, thank you, because we can track that email address and at least start somewhere.
See if you can pull any prints off of this, and let's get a read on that email.
I'll let you know what we can find.
We had no clue what or who we were dealing with.
Detective?
Yeah.
Got a problem.
He's informed by radio that a second bag has been found at another house a mile away that also contains additional body parts. Holy smokes.
I never dreamed that we would get a call about other body parts. So now we went from one scene to two scenes.
My fear was that more bags would show up and that as they did, the case would just become more inhumane over time.
We needed to get those body parts to the morgue because that was going to be key in trying to establish the identity of that person.
The woman who lives in the second home is Judon Burnside.
We learned that Judon Burnside is Grace Davis's mother.
So we have Judon Burnside, we have Sue Bostic. Now Flavel has to set about finding Essers. So Sue and Judon are interviewed together. Grace Davis is one woman's daughter and the other woman's niece.
Does she live with either one of you?
She used to, but things have changed, and now we just take care of the kids.
She's gotten into drugs, and her children were taken away from her, and she has drifted off into the streets. And they don't know where she is. They have no idea who would threaten her or why. They both assume it is some sort of drug debt or some sort of difficulty she has fallen into by living on the streets. But they don't know. They haven't seen her or talked to her for some time. They are independently raising her children in the hope that Grace will somehow straighten out her life and return to recover her children. That has not yet happened. So Flavel, once again, is faced with another mystery. Not only who Grace Davis is, but we don't know where she is. And we don't know how she could have acquired an enemy that is not only depraved, but is particularly evil. Who might that be? Flavel doesn't know. Whoever is responsible for this doesn't know where Grace is either, or he wouldn't be leaving these threats with relatives. He'd be going directly to Grace Davis.
Has anything happened in the last few days out of the ordinary?
Well, there was this phone call.
Miss Bostic told us she answered the phone and stated it sounds like somebody's gonna die.
Hello?
Help me, please.
Hello?
She got a phone call from a female voice who was screaming into the phone, and then the line went dead. She wonders if that's connected. Flavel wonders the same thing.
Do either one of you know anybody that would want to do Grace harm?
There is her ex.
Grace's ex-husband has been ordered to pay $400 a month in child support, and he was very unhappy about this. Money, sex, or revenge are common things in a murder case. And here we have money and revenge together.
So, of course, that kind of turns our attention. We needed to talk to Grace's ex-husband.
The ex-husband appears shocked, has no knowledge of any of this.
Mr. Davis, I need to know where you were on the morning of the 7th.
I was with my girlfriend.
He pretty much had an alibi for the time frame that we were looking at. He was in a new relationship, and his new girlfriend actually had taken him to work. We verified his work record, so we were able to clear him as a suspect.
It's just not the guy. It just isn't. It's a shame. It would make this case a lot simpler, but it's not simple. Murders never are.
This is Flavel. Okay, got it. I'll be right there.
It is very unusual to ask a coroner to examine body parts and not a body. It's happened in my career, but it's very rare.
Our medical examiner called us to review all the tissue samples. The body parts, they were not per se surgically removed, but they weren't hacked and whacked.
Whatever was used was very sharp. It made a clean cut right at the joint.
But we did get a hit on the prints.
They do determine the identity of the parts by fingerprint. It's a female, and her name was Nicole Harris. She's 34 years old.
I've never heard of Nicole Harris. So now we got to figure out why are your hands and feet in this bag?
Now the questions become, where was she last seen alive? What is her connection, if any, to Grace Davis? We have someone who is such an enemy of Miss Davis, he's willing to kill just to make a point. That's a serious enemy. So we know that now this person's name is Nicole Harris. Now Flavel has to set about finding where Nicole Harris was last seen alive. And he has to make a death notification to the family.
For you to give them that news is devastating. In a split second, their life is turned upside down.
He finds her mother and has to explain that he doesn't have her daughter's body. He only has parts of it.
So we learned that Nicole Harris was a 34-year-old mother, grew up in a normal family, a couple of towns away from Greenville.
Nicole was my baby sister. I kind of like raised her as my own. That was my heart. It was 7 of us, and Mika was the baby. We nicknamed her Mickey.
Her personality was sweet and loving. She was lovely as a mother. She had the heart of gold.
Where had she been living?
That's the thing. She was not making the best decisions.
Nicole Harris was somebody who had fallen on hard times because she had a drug habit. She would often find herself living on the streets or with random people.
Due to Nicole's substance abuse problem, she didn't have custody of her kids.
We used to, see each other on a regular basis, even though we were mostly with our grandmother.
Mrs. Harris says her daughter has fallen on hard times, but still, Nicole Harris was trying to change her ways, trying to move back into a normal life, to get off the streets and away from the drugs and back to where she began as a mother.
She was working towards getting her life together and coming home. I said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." I said, "I know the kids will be happy."
Knowing that she was never able to rekindle that stable relationship with her children, I'm sure, has continued to haunt the whole family.
That's where it hurts me so bad, because she was talking about coming home and being, the person that I wanted her to be.
And someone has decided to take her life. It's incredibly foul.
Was Nicole employed anywhere?
Nicole hung out at a labor finders, which is a day labor where jobs go out. They go out for the day.
So Flavel goes to labor finders to see who knows Nicole Harris. Some recognize the name, some seem to recall her, but no one seems to know her very well. So Flavel doesn't really learn very much.
Sometimes you pick the wrong rabbit hole. So you go back and start on another one. Then we started looking for Grace.
This is Flavel.
The Davis family reports that they now know where Grace probably is staying.
We learned that she was living with a cousin out in the county.
Flavel is thrilled, but at least he's going to be able to finally speak to Grace Davis to find out perhaps what is going on in this mess.
Ma'am, I need to talk to you about a couple of incidents that happened at your mom and aunt's home.
What? She had no clue that there was body parts left at these locations at her family's houses.
Can we go inside and talk for a few minutes?
Flavel wants to know how Grace Davis becomes somehow the focus of this murder case.
Body parts? And the letters were addressed to me?
That's correct.
There was a direct threat made against her. That's going to scare anyone half to death.
Are you familiar with anybody named Nicole Harris?
That was a big mystery. Grace is related to the people who found the body parts, but she had zero connection to Nicole Harris.
At this moment, Detective Flavel has way more questions than he has answers.
She really didn't know anything about what the letter stated. Our priority at the time was who's threatening Grace and her family, and then who has murdered someone to carry out their threat.
She denies any knowledge of enemies, denies any knowledge of Nicole Harris. She does seem to be generally shocked that this has happened.
We got to look at this a different way, man. We're thinking way too big. So we've got to back up, and we did. We let our work lead us in the right direction.
I need to know where the other part of it is and what went on and why, so I can come to a closure and put her to rest. Why did they take my daughter's life like that? If you know where the other part of her body is, would you please just show the police?
The media helped us in a way. It got the news out there.
The entire city of Greenville is placed on edge because we have a dismembered body, a killer on the loose. It is a topic of conversation in Greenville, South Carolina.
And it wasn't long after our uniform dispatch received a call from the Nicholtown area.
You have a call on line 1.
Thank you. Flavel.
A resident there had called in a foul odor in the neighborhood, said, hey, y'all might want to come out here.
When they get out of the car, they're overcome by the smell of death. When you're a policeman, you never, ever forget the smell of death.
Behind the house, we find a big, storage container. That's where the smell is coming from. The odor was unbearable, disgusting to say the least.
They remove the lid, and up to the top of the lid, it is a blood and flesh soup. Maybe they have just found Nicole Harris.
It was disgusting. We're trying to come up with a game plan on how are we going to attack this container because it's probably, 80% liquid at this time.
Let's get this area roped off and get a report on the house.
Can I help you with something?
As they are examining this pile of goop in this drum, the homeowner arrives, a woman, and says, "What are you doing?"
Is that your container?
Well, it's behind my house, ain't it?
He looks at her and says in his own head, "Did you kill Nicole Harris? Or did someone in your house do it?"
All right, ma'am, I need you to step back. This is an active crime scene.
So, y'all are investigating the death of a pig?
Like, what? She said we had a pig picking and we cleaned the pig and I just put it in that container.
She has an explanation for this barrel and contents that might be true. It also might not be.
We immediately stopped what we were doing. We called for our forensics division.
They can conduct an immediate test on the blood and tell you human or animal on the spot.
Yeah, this is definitely a pig.
All right, let's pack it up.
Dead ends are common in homicide investigations. Something looks so promising, and it falls apart. It goes through your fingers like sand.
It's really disappointing, but you never quit. You've still got a family that needs answers.
We need a new step. There was that email that was left on the threatening note. Flavel submitted it when he found it, and now computer forensics has a result.
Call you back.
I hear you got something for me.
Yeah, there might be something.
Yeah?
Yeah.
They inform him a public use computer in a library was used to send the email.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
What's your name?
Jessica?
Jessica, my name's Detective Flavel. I need to know if I can obtain some security footage of the library for a case that I'm working on.
Oh, yeah.
Can you help me obtain that?
Yeah, I can help you with that. Good. Mandy, can you cover the desk for me for a minute? Of course. Follow me.
There is a God, because public libraries have surveillance cameras.
Okay, here is the tape you were asking about.
Not only did it give us the address, but it gave us the date and time that this email address was checked.
He goes and he sees footage, and he sees an African-American couple, man and woman, using the computer. The man is not anyone that Flavel has ever seen, and the woman that's with him is not Grace Davis.
What struck me is he was wearing gloves. He's inside the library, but he's got on these big, thick gloves.
He doesn't want to leave fingerprints on the keys, as if that matters. He's using a computer that has its own fingerprint. So he's typing this email. On April the 6th, the day before the body parts are found. Now we're getting somewhere. So who are these people?
Getting actual video of the suspects in the library at that date and time gave us a lot of momentum in our case.
So now it's time to bring Grace Davis in for another interview and confront her with this video.
Grace, I need you to start being honest with me.
Flavel explains that this is not going to go away. I'm not going to go away. And we're going to get to the bottom of this.
And I said, hey, do you recognize these people? Tell me what's going on.
Okay, look, I know him and his wife, but I don't talk to them anymore.
Who is he?
And she cracks. She says, the people on this tape are Carmen and Clarence Jenkins.
We used to live together and we used to date.
All three of you?
I got together with them and we all fell in love. I had a sexual relationship with Clarence Jenkins. I also had a sexual relationship with Carmen Jenkins. Okay. You started talking about a triangle situation where everybody's in love with everybody else. Things can get enormously complicated.
It was good for a while until Clarence started being all controlling.
She said he's real controlling and they can't leave the house.
She says, then I found out that Clarence was abusive. So Clarence's verbal abuse and weirdness caused Miss Davis to come to her senses to some degree and to leave these people.
I just knew I had to get out of there.
So she makes a decision to leave, and she leaves, literally walks away.
She left on the 16th of March. April the 6th, just a few weeks later, body parts and threats show up. That's remarkable.
So now, who's Carmen and Clarence? How are you involved in this? So we made an attempt to talk to Carmen and Clarence Jenkins to find out what was actually going on.
Carmen Jenkins?
Yes.
Ma'am, we need to speak with you about a case we're investigating. Is your husband home right now?
This really isn't a good time.
She immediately says that they're busy right now, but they will come down to the police station later in the day to discuss it with them, her and Clarence.
So we left. But we had a team of investigators out there and we did surveillance.
Minutes after Flavel leaves, their surveillance team reports that Carmen and Clarence are carrying black trash bags from their trailer to a dumpster.
Detective Garrison was watching through binoculars, and the trash bags got blue pull strings.
The very same type that were found with the mutilated body parts. Flavel and his partner return to the dumpster near the property and look in the bags that they threw away.
There were 2 or 3 empty bleach bottles, ammonia bottles, carpet cleaning solutions, of course indicative of somebody cleaning something up.
Whatever happened to Nicole Harris probably happened to her in that trailer. Detective Flavel's experience tells him that that crime scene is that trailer. He needs a warrant. He can't get it based on cleaning supplies. Throwing those away isn't against the law. He needs another way.
Flavel.
Flavel finds that they had just entered a traffic warrant for Clarence's arrest on his record.
That really was a lucky break for us, and it was fresh off the press.
There is Flavel's way in. They return with their search warrant in hand.
Police, open up.
They knock on the door, and Carmen answers it.
Ma'am, I have a warrant for Clarence Jenkins.
Well, he ain't here right now.
And Flavel looks at her and says, we're going to search the premise, and if I find him in here, I'm going to charge you with harboring a fugitive. And she steps aside. They go in.
The house is disgusting. It is nasty. There's pots on the counter with fungus growing in them. Obviously, there was no bleach used and there was no carpet cleaner used to clean anything in the house. in the bathroom, and the shower is like spray painted red. As I'm clearing the bathroom, you can see what I suspect to be blood spatter on the wall. Aiken goes to the left. He says, man, there's a hole.
Detective, I got something back here.
He notices a piece of drywall that's out of alignment with part of the wall. He shines a light in that crack, and who does he see?
Come out on your hands and knees. Keep your hands where I can see them.
And there's Clarence Jenkins hiding behind this piece of paneling.
Come out of there, Clarence. You're under arrest.
All right, I'll take him in. She's going to be charged with harboring a fugitive.
Copy that.
Let's go.
Now that Detective Flavel has seen apparent evidence of a murder, he's granted a second warrant to search for evidence of death in this trailer.
Once we did that search warrant, forensics came out. We told them what we observed. Then they go in, start processing.
We were looking specifically for items that would connect the victim to the trailer and any potential evidence of foul play.
Get those light for me, will you? That's positive for blood.
When you look into the bathroom, you could see the wallpaper was gone. Inside of the shower stall was painted, the floor was painted.
They're trying to cover up blood. They missed a number of places, which you can see blood spatter on the walls, blood spatter on the sink area, staining everywhere.
I go to the back bedroom.
Found these and that.
There were knives, swords, handcuffs in the back bedroom. We knew we had something with the knives.
Found something here.
I'd found a clipboard, and in that clipboard were typed letters addressed to the same individuals where the body parts were sent.
This is a filthy trailer filled with all sorts of horrible evidence. So this is all adding up to the scene of the death of Nicole Harris. But why did Nicole Harris die? Why was she murdered and dismembered, for heaven's sake? And how does it connect to Miss Davis and the Jenkins? That's what they don't know.
So Clarence was eventually transported down to the law enforcement center where I went and interviewed him.
Look, Clarence, we know you're involved. We found the letters, we found blood, and we even found the trash bags.
It wasn't me.
We had evidence that she died there, but it just still really didn't answer all the questions that needed to be answered.
It is a bizarre circumstance in every possible way. A three-person love triangle, a dismemberment homicide, a filthy trailer filled with overwhelming evidence. You take the time to spray paint a bathroom, you don't throw away the drafts of the threatening note. Absolutely ridiculous. It's like children trying to do this. Not the sharpest knives in the drawer, but killers tend not to be.
I want a lawyer.
We still didn't have Nicole. We had Nicole's hands and feet, but we still hadn't found the body. So, yeah, we really didn't have any information to give the family.
I have faith in God, and I know that it was going to get solved. But, I mean, it was just devastating.
We had a candlelight vigil, but the thing was, we still was, still going through. The time for me, it was real hard.
So Flavel is organizing the case as best he can so they can proceed to trial. During this process, a year goes by, and Carmen decides she wants to talk. She says, I want to tell you what happened.
The prosecutor called and wanted us to come up for a meeting with Carmen and her attorneys.
Flavel is elated.
We're at the solicitor's office with her attorneys, the prosecutors, and finally she's giving us her confession.
And the conversation begins. So the question Flavel has is simple. What happened inside that trailer, Carmen? What happened to Nicole Harris? Carmen sits down with Detective Flavel. Flavel says, I want you to tell me the entire story. How did all this unfold?
That interview is probably one of the coldest interviews I've ever done. She was just as cold as she could be.
She says that Clarence Jenkins had met Grace Davis on the street and brought her home with him.
When Grace left her ex-husband, she ended up in a women's shelter for a little while. So Clarence offered for Grace to move in with him and his wife.
Davis moved into their trailer and became sexually involved with both of them. They were all happily together. So happily, they had considered trying to get married as a threesome to somehow make this official.
So what went wrong?
Things got heated between Clarence and Grace.
I guess the dynamic of it was such that he was definitely the one in control, and his personality wasn't anything she planned to deal with on a long-term basis.
Clarence was verbally abusive, and it upset Grace Davis, and she decided to leave them.
So when Grace left to make a better life for herself, they're like, it's the three of us or none of us.
Clarence was wild. No one leaves him. He's going to get her back at any cost. Clarence goes to labor finders. He notices Nicole Harris.
Excuse me, miss.
Yes, do I know you?
I need you to come with me.
He convinces her he's a policeman. He puts her in his car and he drives her to their trailer.
I thought we were going to the station.
Give me your hands. Come on.
Carmen says he shows up with Nicole, and she's in handcuffs, and he takes her straight to this back room.
Please, let me go!
Stop that.
The first plan Clarence had was to use Nicole Harris to make threats. He handcuffs her to a chair. He makes her make that phone call to Sue Bostic.
You tell Grace she needs to get her ass back here.
Help me!
Although she didn't follow the script and didn't say much, which is why Bostic only heard screaming and then the line went dead.
And then what happened?
The threats weren't working, so Clarence came up with another idea.
And then Clarence just comes up to Carmen and says, hey, you gotta kill that girl.
Here. Get on with it.
You don't have to do this. Please.
Go on now, get on with it.
It's a monstrous idea. Clarence Jenkins is willing to use the death of a perfect stranger as a device to regain the love and admiration of another female. How sick is that? How sick can you be? And Carmen is a participant in this crime.
Clarence tells her to use a piece of coaxial cable and strangle her. Carmen goes in there, puts the coaxial around Nicole's neck, and tries to strangle her.
But I wasn't strong enough, so Clarence did it. I can't do it.
Get out the way.
So Clarence takes over and kills her by strangling her to death.
They then take her and drag her into the front bathroom.
Then he takes a machete and cuts off her feet and her hands with powerful blows with a very long, sharp blade.
They get like some garden shears and he cuts the toes off.
Then he bags these parts in 2 different bags. He writes the threatening letters. That Clarence Jenkins would devise such a plan is beyond monstrous. If I was so empowered, I would sit Clarence down and I would say, Clarence, I'm going to stuff you into a food processor and press liquefy, and then I'm going to pour you down a toilet, because that is where you belong.
I need to know where the rest of McCall's body is.
Carmen gave us the location that they actually dumped McCall Harris's body. It was out in a vacant field, and they actually poured gas on it and tried to burn it.
Good heavens. For what? The love and admiration of a female. Apparently so.
She had no emotion. I mean, the whole time it was like really eerie. We called Upstate Search and Rescue and they brought their dogs out.
We were unfortunate that most of that area had been cut sometime in that 1.5 years, but all in all, we did collect a number of bones, and there were 8 or 10 different items of evidence that we collected. One of those items of evidence being a pair of garden loppers.
Clarence was tried for murder. He was convicted and he was given life without parole. Carmen was originally sentenced to 50 years, and after her testimony, that sentence was reduced to 40. You just killed someone just to play some silly game. So, what's enough?
You always think of dangerous people as having like lots of weapons, but really the most dangerous people that exist are those without empathy. And clearly, Carmen and Clarence had no empathy for McCall Harris.
I just wanted the world to know that the tragedy that happened is something you never want to go through. My mother would want this story to be told.
I got her ashes and everything, and I keep them close to me. But I'm still dealing with it. She was a wonderful person. She didn't deserve to go like this.
Detective Flavel represents yet another American detective whose experience, whose perseverance unraveled this case and punished the people involved. He's to be admired for that. along with every other American detective who does the same thing every day and every night.
Most people who live in the wilderness are prepared to run into wild animals, so they're watchful. But nobody expects a human predator to be hiding behind a tree and start shooting at you.
When a man was found dead and his wife was missing, the Alaskan wilderness turned into a dangerous game of catch me if you can.
There are helicopters buzzing overhead every day for a month.
And the manhunt led investigators to a tent right next to the victim's dead body.
For a guy who chose to camp right near the corpse, he looked very suspicious.
But did the police have the wrong suspect?
This just seemed like too big a coincidence for the troopers to swallow.
And by the time the police made an arrest, no one knew who or what to believe.
Everywhere you look, this story had strange but fascinating aspects.
Today, we're north of the border in Chulitna, Alaska, for part 1 of the Mountain Man murders. I'm Sloan Glass, and this is American Homicide. And just a note that this episode contains some graphic content. Please take care while listening. Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor were newlyweds who lived and worked just outside of Anchorage, Alaska. But on weekends, the two spent a lot of time at their cabin in the remote woods of Chulitna.
Chulitna is not a town. It's a designated wilderness area, about 115 miles north of Anchorage or 40 miles north of the town of Talkeetna.
True crime author Robin Barefield wrote Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier.
The Chulitna River runs through it. The Talkeetna Mountains are near there, and it is just a very wild area. There are no roads that run through Chulitna.
Living there is literally and figuratively off the grid.
Living off the grid in Alaska means you are responsible for your electricity, you're responsible for your sewer, you're responsible for getting wood to keep warm, and for getting fuel if you need fuel for a ATV or to run a generator.
Chulitna is so far removed from the rest of Alaska that there are only 2 ways to get there. One is the more traditional route, the Parks Highway.
The Parks Highway is the highway that connects Anchorage to Fairbanks. And you can drive along on the highway and pull off the road and then either hike or take an ATV into your cabin. The other way to get into Chulitna is by the Alaska Railroad.
The Alaska Railroad not only runs freight trains, but also operates passenger trains.
The railroad runs a train on a particular schedule. It varies from season to season, but it goes into this area and it does what is known as a whistle stop or a flag stop, which means that either the train knows they have a passenger on board that wants to get off at a certain stop, or the engineer sees people standing beside the tracks and he stops there.
That train line not only is important for getting from point A to point B, but it's also how locals get their food and supplies. So that gives you an idea of just how far remote Chulitna is, and how different life is for people who live there.
The people who live there live off the grid. They like their peace and quiet, and they're very self-sufficient.
And that summed up Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor.
He had lived in Alaska his entire life, except for 2 stints in the military in Vietnam, but he had no desire to leave. He loved it here. Debbie was good in the wilderness. She liked to hunt. She liked to fish. She loved to get outdoors. So they made a good pair, and their personalities offset each other.
Rick was type A, and Debbie was reserved and quiet. After years of dating, Rick finally popped the question to Debbie, and the two 40-somethings got married in 1995.
Rick was a confirmed lifelong bachelor, but friends and family say they fell hard for each other.
The two loved spending long weekends at their cabin in Chulitna, and just before Memorial Day weekend in 1997, that's what they did. Their plan was always the same. Rick would drive up on Thursday to get the cabin ready. And then after work on Friday, Debbie would drive up and meet him. And listen to this adventure. From their home in Anchorage, the drive was a few hours north. Then they would park their cars at a lot along the railroad tracks. From there, they'd hop on their ATVs for the final leg of the journey.
Rick and Debbie's cabin was 8 miles from the road, so, it's quite a ways to travel after you get out of your car.
Door to door, it was about a 4-hour trek for a long weekend of relaxation in the woods. But something happened in Chulitna that Memorial Day weekend, because Rick and Debbie made it up there, and then vanished.
When Debbie didn't show up for work on the Tuesday after Memorial Day, her boss became very concerned because that was unlike Debbie. She was very dependable, and if she was going to be late for work or have to miss work for some reason, she always called.
Rick also was a no-show at work that Tuesday, and nobody could get in touch with either of them. So Debbie's boss called Debbie's brother.
Debbie's brother was a little worried about them running into bears because they went missing right when the bears are coming out of hibernation. So he was concerned about that, but Rick and Debbie were smart and knew how to handle the outdoors, so it was unlikely that they were going to do something to get themselves in trouble. So he went to their cabin in Chulitna. When he arrived, he did not find Rick or Debbie, but the cabin was closed and the dogs were closed inside, and they'd obviously been closed inside for several hours because they'd gone to the bathroom on the floor.
Rick and Debbie's border collies appeared to be scared and hungry, as if they'd been left alone for an extended period of time. And there were some other things inside the cabin that stood out to Debbie's brother.
He found a plate of cheese on the table, cheese and crackers, and an open beer. And he said that was not like Rick or Debbie either because they were very good housekeepers. So he felt certain something was wrong as soon as he arrived at the cabin.
Rick and Debbie's ATVs were also missing. So he waited around the cabin, hoping the two would return. But they didn't.
And the next morning, he decided he'd go out and look around a little bit. So about 2 miles from the cabin, he found Rick's ATV on the edge of a creek, but there was no sign of Rick. And then he was really worried. So he called the Alaska State Troopers and said, "I know it hasn't been 48 hours, but there's something wrong here." And the troopers responded immediately.
Rick Beery served 2 tours in Vietnam. So this wasn't someone the troopers expected to get lost in the woods or attacked by wildlife. A search crew, including 15 Alaska State Troopers and multiple tracking dogs, fanned out around Chulitna, but finding Rick and Debbie was a challenge. It was summertime in Alaska, meaning the forest was thick, the ground was muddy, and the air was filled with mosquitoes. So troopers also took to the sky and sent 2 search helicopters to the area. And that's when they located Rick.
The troopers found Rick fairly quickly as soon as they began looking. He wasn't far from his ATV. He was in the creek in a deep hole.
On the Thursday after Memorial Day, troopers found Rick Beery's body in a creek, some 200 yards away from his ATV and 2 miles from his cabin.
And he had been shot once in the head, execution style.
It was a gruesome and puzzling discovery for troopers. Murders rarely happen in the Alaska wilderness, especially an execution-style murder. And that's when the focus shifted to Rick's wife, Debbie.
They didn't find Debbie's body or her ATV, so she immediately became a suspect in the case. To the troopers, it looked like this could have been a love spat that, went off the rails, and she shot him and then took off.
But no one wanted to believe that Debbie Rehor, the person her coworkers called sweetheart, would do any harm towards Rick. If anything, it might have been the other way around.
Rick was a big guy who could have a hot temper. He lost his temper fairly easily, and he didn't hold back from telling people what he thought.
People described Rick as stubborn and gruff, and said he sometimes questioned authority. In fact, that's how he got in trouble with the feds back in the 80s.
He tried to butt heads with the IRS, and it didn't work out so well for him. So he did about 11 months in jail, not too long after he and Debbie were beginning to date. But she hung in there with him and waited for him to get out of jail, and they moved on with their lives.
The mystery over what happened to Rick and Debbie that Memorial Day weekend baffled troopers and people who lived in the area.
I think this was a big story in Alaska and elsewhere because this is an unusual way to die in the wilderness. You don't expect somebody in the Alaska wilderness to be shot by another human execution style.
As search crews continued to comb through the miles of forest in the area looking for Debbie, investigators searched for clues. They focused heavily on the railroad tracks that cut through Chulitna. The railroad has their own police force who patrol those tracks, but there were no reports of anything suspicious.
There were electrical workers working along the railroad tracks in the area. They were installing fiber optic cable, and the troopers questioned them, and they said there was a campsite in the area near where they found Rick's body.
And those workers reported hearing gunshots coming from that area.
The campsite was kind of a mess that looked like it had been used fairly recently, and whoever was staying there had made a makeshift flag flying a pair of women's underwear.
So we have a mysterious campsite near the creek where Rick's dead body turned up. And not only that, but there is also the bizarre detail of a pair of women's underwear hanging on a tree branch. What's that about? Alaska State Troopers also had a lot of questions.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Lori Siegel, a longtime tech journalist, and consider my new podcast, Mostly Human, your bridge to the future.
Anyone can now be an entrepreneur. Anyone can build an app, and it's very empowering.
Each week, I'll speak to the people building that future, and we're going to break down what all of this innovation actually means for you.
What I come to realize is that when people think that they're dating this AI companion, they're actually dating the companies that create this.
We're experiencing one of the greatest tech accelerations in human history. And let's be honest, that can be messy.
There's no playbook for what to do when an AI model hallucinates a story about you.
But it's my belief that we should all benefit from this moment. Mostly Human will show you how. My goal is to give you the playbook so you can benefit.
The reason I say agency is because, if we can give power back to people, then I think that's probably the best thing we can do for your mental health.
Listen to Mostly Human on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
If you're trying to keep up with everything happening on and off the court, we've got you covered on the podcast Flagrant and Funny.
You look at the top 4 number 1 seeds. What do you think UCLA is going to do? Break down that for me, my friend.
Obviously, UConn is the overwhelming favorite in this tournament, but I'll be honest, I think people are kind of sleeping on Texas.
Experts are suggesting that UCLA is the number 1 challenger to UConn, and that right after that would be Texas. SEC is so deep and so thick in just about everything. It really is annoying. So it's UCLA, Texas, South Carolina, LSU. Only ones that could possibly upset UConn.
On Flagrant and Funny, we're giving our unfiltered takes on the biggest moments, the conversations everyone's having.
So whether your bracket is busted or you just want the latest on the tournament, we got you. Listen to Flagrant and Funny with Carrie Champion and Jamel Hill on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Presented by Capital One, founding partner of iHeart Women's Sports.
In 2023, former Bachelor star Clayton Echard found himself at the center of a paternity scandal.
The family court hearings that followed revealed glaring inconsistencies in her story.
This began a years-long court battle to prove the truth.
You doctored this particular test twice, Ms. Owens, correct?
I doctored the test once.
It took an army of internet detectives to crack the case.
I wanted people to be able to see what their tax dollars were being used for.
Sunlight's the greatest disinfectant.
They would uncover a disturbing pattern. 2 more men who'd been through the same thing.
Greg Gillespie and Michael Mancini.
My mind was blown.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trap.
Laura, Scottsdale Police.
As the season continues, Laura Owens finally faces consequences.
Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news out of Maricopa County as Laura Owens has been indicted on fraud charges.
This isn't over until justice is served in Arizona.
Listen to Love Trapped podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The seasons in Alaska are extreme. After a harsh winter, things quickly change during the months of May. That's when Alaska emerges from its hibernation. Warmer temperatures arrive, the ground begins to thaw, and daylight extends well past bedtime.
1 week, there's ice on the lake. The next week, the ice is gone, and the following week, the leaves are out.
Bill Estelle was the assistant district attorney in Palmer, Alaska.
Spring comes in May, and by Memorial Day, it's 18 hours of daylight, and summer is underway. Most people around Memorial Day will take an extra day off and have a 3 or 4 day weekend and get things ready for summer.
And that's what husband and wife, Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor, did over Memorial Day weekend in 1997. They headed to their cabin in the rural Alaskan area of Chulitna, but they never returned.
Their four-wheelers were gone, and they had just seemingly disappeared.
An exhaustive search through the remote area by foot was followed by an aerial search. And that's when a helicopter pilot noticed something.
When the troopers are out there with the helicopter pilot is getting ready to leave and does one more circle, and out of the corner of his eye, he catches a glint of sunlight off something in a beaver pond. And that's where Rick Berry's body was found. He was killed with a shot to the head from a .22 rifle, and it appears that his body would have floated downstream, settled to the bottom, and probably would not have been found but for the coincidental sighting.
The 48-year-old had taken a single bullet to the head, execution style. Meanwhile, Rick's wife, Debbie, was nowhere to be found.
He's dead. She's missing. She becomes another suspect because it could be some sort of a domestic dispute situation. And they're pulling out all the stops at this point to bring more investigative resources to search about for her or for any clue as to where she might have gone.
Since Chulitna didn't have a police force of their own, the Alaska State Troopers handled the investigation. But getting statements wasn't easy because there were only a dozen or so cabins in the area.
It was very sparsely populated, and the people that had cabins there tended to be recreational cabins or they were retirees, but very few full-time residents.
With so few people in the area, investigators then turned to local railroad employees for help because those railroad tracks were how most people made their way in and out of Chulitna.
They learned in interviewing the railroad personnel that somebody had seen somebody walking in the area carrying a rifle, and it turned out to be a person that was going fishing, and they found traces of his campsite and his use of a .22 firearm.
And here's the crazy part. This person had set up camp right where they found Rick's body. Enter 21-year-old Gavin Saha. He came forward to investigators and told them how over Memorial Day weekend, he was backpacking along the railroad tracks through Chulitna.
Gavin Saha had been walking in the area, carrying a rifle, and had been shooting his .22 rifle was the murder weapon.
This was a huge lead. Gavin Saha owned the same type of gun as the murder weapon. Not to mention, he had camped virtually right next to Rick's dead body. The troopers felt like they were making progress. But Gavin denied having any idea he set up his tent near a murder scene. The troopers pushed back. Because at that time of the year in Alaska, the sun merely dips below the horizon and then comes back up. That means there's light for most of the day. So the fact that Gavin didn't notice he set up his camp right next to Rick's dead body,
it was just inconceivable. And so he became sort of the prime suspect as they were sorting out what actually happened.
one thing to remember is Gavin was the one who went to the police.
There is a young man who came forward to us and said, I was out in that area. I was camping and fishing and so forth.
Captain Don Savage was part of the team of Alaskan state troopers who investigated.
He was camped right along the railroad tracks. I think it was within a couple of 100 yards of where Rick was found and his four-wheeler was found.
Keep in mind, Chulitna is not easily accessible, unless you came by train or ATV. Neither of which this suspect did.
His mom had apparently dropped him off somewhere so he could hike up the railroad tracks, and that's where he was camping. And he had a .22 rifle with him, and we knew that the murder weapon had been a .22.
Gavin explained that during his hiking excursion, he quickly found himself in over his head. He mistakenly left his map at home and got lost. A day and a half into his trek, Gavin said he stumbled upon a four-wheeler. Troopers believe it belonged to Debbie. It was partially submerged in a creek and looked to be stuck in the mud. Off the back of it, he noticed a backpack. After fishing the bag off the four-wheeler, Gavin found a purse, some clothes, and some other things inside the bag.
He had found the Pepsi and some chewing gum, I believe.
Gavin told troopers he took that 2-liter bottle of Pepsi and gum.
But he denied taking anything else, and he denied seeing Rick's body.
For every question the troopers asked, Gavin had a reasonable answer. And that's when they zeroed in on Gavin's campsite.
His campsite was, I guess, notoriously messy. And for whatever reason, he had a pair of red underwear along with him.
Flying on a tree branch above Gavin's campsite was a pair of women's underwear. The underwear waved in the wind, kind of like a flag. But Gavin told investigators he had an explanation for that as well.
He had gone out there to hike and fish, and he had brought this pair of his girlfriend's or ex-girlfriend's panties along with him. For whatever reason, he thought it would be humorous to put that out there so that passengers on the train could see the red underwear as they went by.
So, we have a young man who set up camp near a dead body he claimed he didn't know was there, and a pair of women's underwear that he used as a flag at the campsite. Keep in mind, the victim's wife, Debbie, was still missing.
It's almost too cooperative at this point in time.
But Gavin Saha told investigators he didn't know Rick Beery or Debbie Rehor. And more importantly, he had nothing to do with Rick's murder. It was all circumstantial.
He said it was the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's Assistant DA Bill Estelle.
And that didn't add up and didn't make sense with the other things he had said.
So what would have been Gavin's motive to kill? The troopers didn't know, and were still questioning him when a disturbing update rolled in. Investigators had finally located Debbie, and the news wasn't good.
She was shot, and her body just dragged off into the woods and covered with grass and sticks. When they found her body, it was clear that they had both been killed by shots to the head, and it appeared that they were both likely killed at the same time in the same place.
Nearly a week after Rick's body turned up in a creek, troopers found Debbie's body along that same creek. And just like her husband, Debbie had taken a fatal gunshot to the head. And that's where the similarities ended. Here's Captain Don Savage again.
She was found in the brush. She was naked from the waist down, which is not normal for if you're traveling or any of those circumstances in a remote area like that. So that raised some concerns about sexual assault.
Debbie's body was turned over to the medical examiner, who confirmed the trooper's worst fears. Debbie had been sexually assaulted.
The determination, as I recall, was that it was quite likely that it was post-mortem that she had that sexual contact.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're trying to keep up with everything happening on and off the court, we've got you covered on the podcast Flagrant and Funny.
You look at the top 4 number 1 seeds. What do you think UCLA is going to do? Break down that for me, my friend.
Obviously, UConn is the overwhelming favorite in this tournament, but I'll be honest, I think people are kind of sleeping on Texas.
Experts are suggesting that UCLA is the number 1 challenger to UConn, and that right after that would be Texas. SEC is so deep and so thick in just about everything. It really is annoying. So it's UCLA, Texas, South Carolina, LSU. Only ones that could possibly upset UConn.
On Flagrant and Funny, we're giving our unfiltered takes on the biggest moments, the conversations everyone's having.
So whether your bracket is busted or you just want the latest on the tournament, we got you. Listen to Flagrant and Funny with Carrie Champion and Jamel Hill on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Presented by Capital One, founding partner of iHeart Women's Sports.
I'm Lori Siegel, a longtime tech journalist, and consider my new podcast, Mostly Human, your bridge to the future.
Anyone can now be an entrepreneur. Anyone can build an app, and it's very empowering.
Each week, I'll speak to the people building that future, and we're going to break down what all of this innovation actually means for you.
What I come to realize is that when people think that they're dating these AI companion, they're actually dating the companies that create this.
We're experiencing one of the greatest tech accelerations in human history. And let's be honest, that can be messy.
There's no playbook for what to do when an AI model hallucinates a story about you.
But it's my belief that we should all benefit from this moment. Mostly Human will show you how. My goal is to give you the playbook so you can benefit.
The reason I say agency is because, if we can give power back to people, then I think that's probably the best thing we can do for your mental health.
Listen to Mostly Human on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
In 2023, former Bachelor star Clayton Echard found himself at the center of a paternity scandal.
The family court hearings that followed revealed glaring inconsistencies in her story.
This began a years-long court battle to prove the truth.
You doctored this particular test twice, Ms. Owens, correct?
I doctored the test once.
It took an army of internet detectives to crack the case.
I wanted people to be able to see what their tax dollars were being used for.
Sunlight's the greatest disinfectant.
They would uncover a disturbing pattern. 2 more men who'd been through the same thing.
Greg Gillespie and Michael Mancini.
My mind was blown.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped.
Laura, Scottsdale Police.
As the season continues, Laura Owens finally faces consequences.
Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news out of Maricopa County as Laura Owens has been indicted on fraud charges.
This isn't over until justice is served in Arizona.
Listen to Love Trapped podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. On the same weekend Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor were murdered, a young hiker named Gavin Saha set up his campsite a few yards away from Rick's body.
He was in the place at the time and could easily have been the perpetrator.
That's Assistant District Attorney Bill Estelle.
Gavin Saha had some things in his past that made the troopers pay attention to him.
21-year-old Gavin Saha was the troopers' main suspect. And then investigators were still processing the discovery of Debbie Rehor. Troopers found her body along the same creek that they had found her husband. Debbie had contusions and abrasions on her legs and was naked from the waist down.
There were bullet wounds and signs of sexual assault, and it was a very tragic situation.
Gavin's fingerprints were also all over a backpack that contained Debbie's wallet and clothing. But Gavin denied killing Rick and Debbie.
She was raped, shot, and her body just dragged off into the woods, and she was left there partially undressed, covered with grass and sticks. They found DNA.
Did that DNA belong to Gavin Saha?
They went and asked him for a DNA sample and got his DNA. It didn't match.
Even with all that circumstantial evidence, Gavin was cleared. It was a major blow to the investigation that was about to get some help from a national TV program.
Now, from our Washington Crime Center, John Walsh.
Good evening. Our first case tonight is outrageous. It's about a man who worked hard.
With a killer and a rapist on the loose in the Alaskan wilderness, and the original suspect cleared, the television show America's Most Wanted got involved. The show sent a team to start filming near Chulitna. By then, the Alaska State Troopers had turned their attention towards someone else.
Rick and Debbie's nearest neighbor, about a mile away from their cabin, was Paul Stavignord.
Author Robin Barefield wrote about the case, and I will mention that you'll hear Paul's last name pronounced a couple different ways. For the sake of simplicity, we'll call him Stavignord.
Paul Stavignord was just kind of a backwoods man. He had a big bushy beard, long hair, wire-rimmed glasses.
Unlike Rick and Debbie, Paul Stavignord lived in his Chulitna cabin year-round. He had spent 20 years working for the Alaska Railroad, but hurt his back. That's when he quit his job and focused on his artwork.
He liked to make little pewter animals, and he carved intricate flutes. And he not only carved these flutes, but he played the flute very well, and he wrote flute music. And he had done 3 albums of flute music, as a matter of fact. And he seemed like a peaceful, easygoing type.
So why were the troopers focusing on this peace-loving and flute-playing guy?
When the troopers began talking to Rick and Debbie's other neighbors in the area, they told them that Rick and Debbie got along with everyone except for Paul Stavignord. Paul and Rick in particular had a very contentious relationship.
The troopers learned that Paul and Rick were not friends, and how their relationship soured when Rick accused Paul Stavignord of stealing things from his cabin.
And we know that Rick wasn't the kind of person to back away from a fight, so he had a reputation for being a bit of a hothead.
So the troopers questioned Paul, but Paul said that Memorial Day weekend when Rick and Debbie were murdered, he wasn't even in town. He said he had left his cabin in Chulitna and traveled some 4 hours north.
He said he'd gone to Fairbanks for the weekend, and he even gave them the names of restaurants where he stopped, places where he stopped to get gas or stopped to get snacks.
But here's where Paul had trouble backing up his alibi.
He didn't have any receipts from the restaurants where he said he visited on his way to Fairbanks or the gas stations, but that's because he claims he paid for everything in cash.
And this is where it's important to learn some backstory on Paul Stavignord.
Paul lived a life as close to the mountain man as anybody we have in Alaska.
That's Paul's friend, Keith Beha.
He was comfortable in a wilderness setting, built his cabin and lived off the grid, if you will. No electricity, no television, none of the things that most of us Americans are used to.
As part of Paul's mountain man lifestyle, he didn't wear a watch. He told investigators he also didn't use credit cards, which is why none of those businesses Paul visited over Memorial Day weekend had a record of him. But the more the troopers looked into Paul's story, the more holes they found. For example, he claimed to have had a steak for lunch at a restaurant, but troopers learned that restaurant did not serve steak for lunch. And once again, Paul said maybe he was actually there around dinner time. He didn't know for sure because he didn't wear a watch. But the Alaska State Troopers thought Paul was lying.
I don't believe that Paul would do something like that.
Then an eyewitness came forward. A railroad employee claimed he saw Paul driving a four-wheeler in Chulitna on the Saturday before Memorial Day. And remember, Paul claimed he was in Fairbanks that day.
He said he was out of town, and the more they investigated, the less that panned out.
That's Assistant DA Bill Estelle.
So it began to look as if he was fabricating his whole absence.
By that time, the troopers were focused squarely on Paul Stavignord. And if you remember, Debbie Rehor had been sexually assaulted, and there was DNA evidence on her. So they asked Paul to provide a DNA sample.
He refused, which heightened their suspicion, so they got a warrant.
That's when the investigation switched gears.
Paul disappeared.
His friend, Keith Beha, was concerned.
They were looking for Paul, couldn't find him. I think panic may have kicked in, and he went to where he was comfortable, the woods. That doesn't surprise me. He's a quality woodsman.
And for the next few weeks, Paul managed to hide from the authorities.
I don't know what he did during that period of time other than just survive out there.
Wanted signs with Paul's picture went up all over the area. But Alaska State Troopers said the person they're looking for didn't match that photo. They believed Paul had cut his long hair, shaved off his big bushy beard, and hopped a freight train out of town.
He had also worked for the railroad, so he was very familiar with how to hop a freight train, how to get on, get off, how to avoid detection. So we got a search warrant to search his cabin.
Inside Paul Stavignord's cabin, troopers first came across a handful of .22 rifles. Then they found a journal in the most unlikely of spots.
He had hidden this somewhere in the rafters of his house. It was one of the troopers climbing around up there that found it hidden in a crack between a couple of boards.
What Paul wrote inside that journal contained some graphic information about his relationship with his neighbor, Debbie Rehor.
They were having consensual sex.
Paul's journal spelled out details of his affair with Debbie.
Everything about it became inconsistent with what people knew about Rick and Debbie and what they knew about the relationship with Stavignord himself.
Were Debbie and Paul having an affair? Or was it Paul's attempt to create an alibi? And if it was his attempt to create an alibi, why hide the journal? By then, the Alaska State Troopers feared that Paul was long gone and had possibly entered Canada. But then, nearly a month after Paul disappeared, he got in touch with the troopers.
I believe America's Most Wanted was getting ready to run a special on him when he turned himself in.
Paul had hired a high-profile defense lawyer and said he was ready to talk with investigators. Here's his friend, Keith Beha.
He did apparently get to a telephone after several weeks and talk to a friend who was responsible for getting him connected with an attorney. And the attorney convinced him he needed to turn himself in.
Paul Stavignord was booked and charged with the murders of Rick Beery and his wife, Debbie Rehor.
You know, I just didn't really accept it. Paul's not the kind of guy that ambushes people or shoots people or he's very safe with firearms. Paul was special in that he was likable, not just to me, but to everybody.
Paul Stavignord claimed he was an innocent man. And he said there was a reason he hopped a freight train and left town.
He had unfortunate experience with law enforcement prior to this event. So, trusting policemen was probably not his first reaction.
So, what was this unfortunate experience with law enforcement that caused Paul to go on the run? And who killed Rick and Debbie?
I never could quite make a decision as to whether he was a dangerous man or whether something snapped.
It ultimately led to one of the most hotly contested trials Alaska has ever seen.
How can somebody go from being a neighbor to being a double murderer at the flip of a switch?
And when it was all over, the lawyers would switch sides.
This is a travesty of justice.
I never could quite make a decision as to whether he was a dangerous man or whether something snapped.
A quiet Alaskan man known for his ability to live off the grid was accused of murdering his neighbors.
They found him in the creek, and they found her about a week later. She'd been shot in the head, and there was evidence of sex, and they thought it was post-mortem.
As the investigation heated up, the suspect took off.
He went on the run pretty quickly when it became obvious that he was the focus of their investigation.
A month later, the suspect was in custody and faced the fight of his life.
They just couldn't believe he did it. They fundamentally couldn't. The guy they knew wouldn't do something like that.
By the end of his trial, the tables would be turned, and the defense lawyers would be the ones defending themselves.
He said, "You have convicted an innocent man."
Today, we're in Chulitna, Alaska, for the conclusion of the Mountain Man murders. I'm Sloan Glass, and this is American Homicide. Just a note that this episode contains some graphic content. Please take care while listening.
Murders in cities and towns, they happen all the time. But a double murder in the middle of the wilderness is unique. It's different.
Maybe you've seen those videos where women of all ages are asked the same question.
If you were stranded in the woods, would you rather be stranded with a random man or a random bear?
The answers were overwhelmingly one-sided.
And 90% of females are choosing to be stranded with the random bear over a random man.
I don't think there's anything scarier in the wilderness than a human out to kill someone.
Robin Barefield authored Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier, a book about true crime in Alaska. Her book covers the murders of husband and wife Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor. Over Memorial Day weekend in 1997, the couple was murdered near their cabin in the remote woods of Chulitna, Alaska.
Chulitna's not a town, but it's a designated wilderness area. Most people who live in the wilderness are prepared to run into bears or angry moose or other animals that you need to watch out for, and you don't expect to run into a murderer in the Alaska wilderness. So I think that's one of the reasons that made this story such a big deal.
Located miles from the nearest road and an hour from the closest town, Chulitna is as off the grid as you can get.
People who live in the wilderness, they do so because they want to be independent. They want to live on their own. They enjoy that freedom. So you're on your own much more up here, and it's frightening when you realize that.
At the time, there were only a dozen or so cabins in the area where Rick and Debbie lived.
In Alaska, neighbors are important. You want people to live close enough to you so that you can help each other if you have a problem.
Rick and Debbie's nearest neighbor lived about a mile away. His name was Paul Stavignord.
Paul was a year-round resident. That was his home, while Rick and Debbie came and went.
At the time, Paul Stavignord was 46 years old. He had long hair, a thick bushy beard, and wore round wire-rimmed glasses. Years earlier, Paul hurt his back working for the railroad. That injury forced him to quit his job. That's when he started making artwork, playing the flute, and living an off-the-grid mountain man lifestyle.
And sometimes people living in a wilderness setting look at the people who come and go like that as outsiders. You know, they don't appreciate them, they resent them. And I think that probably was part of the problem with his relationship with Rick and Debbie. They suspected he stole things from their cabin, and he seemed to have a real problem with them. Rick and Debbie's family knew this. Rick and Debbie talked about it quite a bit.
Paul was the lead suspect in Rick and Debbie's murder. Upon searching his property, they found a journal that detailed an affair Paul was having with Debbie. So, what was it? Were they enemies or lovers?
His family and friends described him as a kind man who was spiritual and was nonviolent. They did not believe he could have killed two people.
Not only that, but Paul had an alibi for the weekend Rick and Debbie were murdered.
He said he'd gone to Fairbanks for the weekend, and he even gave them the names of restaurants where he stopped, places where he stopped to get gas or stopped to get snacks, but he did not have any receipts.
Paul explained that he didn't have any receipts because his off-the-grid lifestyle meant he didn't have credit cards or a checking account. He only paid in cash.
And when the troopers followed up, nobody remembered seeing him at any of the places where he said he'd gone, so his alibi did not hold up.
After the police asked for a sample of his DNA, Paul Stavignard went on the run and vanished into the wilderness.
The manhunt was a big deal, and the troopers threw a lot of resources at it. I know a woman who had a cabin in Chulitna at the time, and she said it was crazy up there after all of this happened because there were choppers flying overhead all the time. She felt like she was in a war zone. It was just crazy for a few weeks until they finally found him.
After 4 weeks on the run, Paul Stavignard turned himself in, but he wasn't alone. He had hired a lawyer and explained to the police that something in his past caused him to run, unrelated to the murders of his neighbors.
He had had unfortunate experience with law enforcement prior to this event.
That's Paul's friend, Keith Beha.
Trusting policemen was probably not his first reaction.
So let's talk about why. Growing up, Paul struggled with drug addiction and was expelled from high school. Over the course of 2 years, he was arrested 5 times for breaking into cabins, stealing a car, and other crimes. Author Robin Barefield explains.
Paul's biggest run-in with the police was when he was released from prison for a liquor store robbery. He and his 2 friends decided to rob the First National Bank of Anchorage in Seward.
In 1971, Paul and 2 others pulled off one of the biggest bank robberies in Alaska's history.
They stole $150,000, but they weren't very good criminals. They hadn't really planned their getaway very well, and they picked one of the worst places in Alaska to try to escape from because it's not remote, but there's only one road that goes into it. So the police chief easily arrested him and sent him back to prison.
4 years in prison was enough for Paul Stavignard to make some changes.
He decided he wanted to turn his life around, and he took a job with the Alaska Railroad, inspecting the tracks, married a waitress for the railroad, and they had 2 children, built a cabin in Chulitna. He loved the Chulitna area. And Paul became very introspective. He became very spiritual, and he started to do artwork.
That's when Paul adopted his sort of hippie lifestyle and threw himself into the arts.
He carved flutes, and he also became fairly skilled at playing the flute, and he ended up recording 3 albums of flute music.
But playing the flute didn't pay the bills. His wife divorced him in the early 1990s and told the court Paul didn't support her emotionally or financially. She got custody of their children and moved away. Paul remained in Chulitna.
There was 2 sides to Paul Stavignard, the peaceful, calm person that most people considered him now, and then this guy who couldn't stay out of trouble when he was younger.
two sides of Paul Stavagnord. That's what lawyers would have to argue over when he went on trial for the murders of Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor.
Suddenly, the trial wasn't about us proving that it was him. It was he had a story to tell. And that changes the complexion entirely.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, former Bachelor star Clayton Echard found himself at the center of a paternity scandal.
The family court hearings that followed revealed glaring inconsistencies in her story.
This began a years-long court battle to prove the truth.
You doctored this particular test twice, Miss Owens, correct?
I doctored the test once.
It took an army of internet detectives to crack the case.
I wanted people to be able to see what their tax dollars were being used for.
Sunlight's the greatest disinfectant.
They would uncover a disturbing pattern. Two more men who'd been through the same thing.
Greg Gillespie and Michael Mancini.
My mind was blown.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped.
Laura, Scottsdale Police.
As the season continues, Laura Owens finally faces consequences.
Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news out of Maricopa County as Laura Owens has been indicted on fraud charges.
This isn't over until justice is served in Arizona.
Listen to Love Trapped podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Why hasn't a woman formally participated in a Formula One race weekend in over a decade?
Think about how many skills they have to develop at such a young age.
What can we learn from all of the new F1 romance novels suddenly popping up every year?
He still smelled of podium champagne and expensive friction.
And how did a 2023 event called Wag-A-Geddon change the paddock forever? That day is just seared into my memory. I'm culture writer and F1 expert Lily Herman, and these are just a few of the questions I'm tackling on No Grip, a Formula One culture podcast that dives into the underexplored pockets of the sport. In each episode, a different guest and I will go deeper into the wacky mishaps, scandals, and sagas, both on the track and far away from it, that have made F1 a delightful, decadent dumpster fire for more than 75 years. Listen to No Grip on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're trying to keep up with everything happening on and off the court, we've got you covered on the podcast Flagrant and Funny.
You look at the top 4 number 1 seeds. What do you think UCLA is going to do? Break down that for me, my friend.
Obviously, UConn is the overwhelming favorite in this tournament, but I'll be honest, I think people are kind of sleeping on Texas.
Experts are suggesting that UCLA is the number 1 challenger to UConn, and that right after that would be Texas. SEC is so deep and so thick in just about everything. It really is annoying. So it's UCLA, Texas, South Carolina, LSU. Only ones that could possibly upset UConn.
On Flagrant and Funny, we're giving our unfiltered takes on the biggest moments, the conversations everyone's having.
So whether your bracket is busted or you just want the latest on the tournament, we got you. Listen to Flagrant and Funny with Carrie Champion and Jamel Hill on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Presented by Capital One, founding partner of iHeart Women's Sports.
In 1998, Paul Stavagnord went on trial. He was accused of killing his neighbors Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor. Over the course of 8 weeks, the jury heard conflicting testimony from dozens of witnesses from both sides. Even Gavin Saha, the man who camped near Rick Beery's dead body, testified. All of it left the jurors looking puzzled and confused, and wondering, who the real Paul Stavignard was.
He went on the run pretty quickly when it became obvious that he was the focus of their investigation, and he was able to stay on the run for quite a while.
Judge Eric Smith presided over the trial that had divided the small Alaskan town.
It hit the community pretty hard. I think the circumstances of it, the manner in which they were killed, was also pretty shocking. And I know that Mr. Stavignard's supporters were very affected by the whole story. They just couldn't believe he did it. You always wonder, well, what's come of our community when something like this happens?
Prosecutors would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the soft-spoken defendant was capable of murdering his neighbors. But they were limited in what they could say.
We kept his criminal history out of the case, so the jury didn't know about his criminal history.
The time Paul stole a car, inadmissible. The time Paul robbed a liquor store, inadmissible. And the time Paul robbed a bank, also inadmissible.
I found that Mr. Stavignard's criminal history, especially the armed robbery and the escape, would tend to make the jury think he was a criminal and therefore make him more likely to have done what the state alleged he had done.
So prosecutors had to rely on DNA evidence found on Debbie Rehor that pointed back to Paul Stavignard.
The autopsy on Ms. Rehor's body revealed there was evidence of sex. They found semen on her body, and they did a DNA test. The DNA did match with what was found on Ms. Rehor.
In their opening statement, the defense team surprised everyone when they admitted Paul did shoot Rick Beery, but they said he did not shoot Debbie Rehor, and they claimed the sex between Debbie and Paul was consensual. All of this caused the courtroom to stir.
Mr. Stavignard, he and his attorneys didn't say much of anything publicly until opening statements in the trial. So it was pretty dramatic.
The defense also called a half-dozen witnesses who spoke to Paul Stavignard's peaceful and spiritual demeanor. But first, they spent a lot of time attacking the character of one of the victims, Rick Beery.
They painted a picture of Mr. Beery as a very difficult, arrogant, angry man.
A handful of neighbors testified that Rick and Paul did not like one another, and that they often clashed.
One of the run-ins had to do with Mr. Beery believing that Mr. Stavignard had taken some equipment from their cabin and confronted Stavignard about it.
The defense also called a half-dozen witnesses who spoke to Paul Stavignard's peaceful and spiritual demeanor.
They did say that he had become this very mellow mountain man, that he lived a simple life, and that he was an artisan. He made this jewelry, and he was a flute player, and kind of a very new agey kind of guy.
And then the defense pointed out that troopers found a flute in Rick and Debbie's cabin, one they believe was a gift from Paul.
They painted a picture of Mr. Stavignard having very antagonistic relationships with Mr. Beery, but a very good relationship with Ms. Rehor. And so they tried to persuade the jury that it would be a natural thing under those circumstances for Ms. Rehor and Mr. Stavignard to have this sexual relationship.
On the stand, Paul Stavignard took several deep breaths and spoke very slowly as he discussed how he cared for Debbie.
He's an articulate, intelligent man, and he was pretty calm and collected on the stand.
He said that on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend in 1997, he was out on a walk and bumped into Debbie.
Mr. Stavignard claimed that he met Ms. Rehor on kind of a grassy knoll above the creek, and they had sex together. So the DNA match came from the consensual sex that he claimed he had with Ms. Rehor.
But afterwards, everything changed.
And I think he was playing his flute for her when Mr. Beery showed up on his four-wheeler and got very upset and started shooting.
According to Paul Stavignard's testimony, Rick Beery yelled, "I'm going to blow your head off," pulled out his gun, and fired at Paul. But Rick missed and struck and killed his wife, Debbie.
He accidentally shot his wife in the head, and Mr. Stavignard returned fire and shot Mr. Beery in the head.
He was shooting at me, and
I believed that I was going to be killed.
That was the voice of Paul Savignord on the witness stand, describing what happened.
It seems like an awful coincidence that she would actually have been hit by a stray bullet.
District Attorney Bill Estelle.
His scenario was that they were having consensual sex, that when they heard the approach of a four-wheeler, he stood up to see who it was, which one wonders, why would one stand up where somebody can see you? And that Rick Beery saw him and shot at him and accidentally killed Deborah. And that he shot Rick Beery in self-defense at some number of yards with a cheap little .22 pistol standing there naked. It was implausible.
During cross-examination, Paul Savignord said his story was so outrageous that he didn't think anyone would believe him.
The details about his relationship were totally at odds with everybody in Deborah's acquaintance, her family, her coworkers, her friends. None of what he described was believable to them, that she would have behaved in that way.
Paul Savignord testified that afterwards, he felt sadness, terror, hopelessness, shame, guilt, and remorse. So he panicked and said he got rid of the evidence. He picked up bullet casings and burned his clothes. Even with his bad back, he said he managed to drag Debbie's body under some tree limbs. He said Rick's body had floated away to a deep hole in a creek, and that's where he left it.
His story was inconsistent with what he said first.
Paul agreed and admitted he'd lied to troopers and even to his friends. Here's more from Judge Eric Smith, who presided over the trial.
Mr. Stavanger lied a lot. The prosecution, relied quite heavily on the fact that he lied.
Paul Savignord said one lie led to another, and that's when he realized he was in too deep. And in order to keep his story straight, he wrote down what happened.
He had a journal, and in the part of the journal, he had written out notes, and it was like he was writing down the story he was going to tell the troopers about where he was and what he did.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, former Bachelor star Clayton Echard found himself at the center of a paternity scandal.
The family court hearings that followed revealed glaring inconsistencies in her story.
This began a years-long court battle to prove the truth.
You doctored this particular test twice, Ms. Owens, correct?
I doctored the test once.
It took an army of internet detectives to crack the case.
I wanted people to be able to see what their tax dollars were being used for.
Sunlight's the greatest disinfectant.
They would uncover a disturbing pattern. 2 more men who'd been through the same thing.
Greg Gillespie and Michael Mancini.
My mind was blown.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped.
Laura, Scottsdale Police.
As the season continues, Laura Owens finally faces consequences.
Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news out of Maricopa County as Laura Owens has been indicted on fraud charges.
This isn't over until justice is served in Arizona.
Listen to Love Trapped podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Why hasn't a woman formally participated in a Formula One race weekend in over a decade?
Think about how many skills they have to develop at such a young age.
What can we learn from all of the new F1 romance novels suddenly popping up every year?
He still smelled of podium champagne and expensive friction.
And how did a 2023 event called Wag-A-Geddon change the paddock forever?
That day is just seared into my memory.
I'm culture writer and F1 expert Lily Herman, and these are just a few of the questions I'm tackling on No Grip, a Formula One culture podcast that dives into the underexplored pockets of the sport. In each episode, a different guest and I will go deeper into the wacky mishaps, scandals, and sagas, both on the track and far away from it, that have made F1 a delightful, decadent dumpster fire for more than 75 years. Listen to No Grip on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're trying to keep up with everything happening on and off the court, we've got you covered on the podcast Flagrant and Funny.
You look at the top 4 number 1 seeds. What do you think UCLA is going to do? Break down that for me, my friend.
Obviously, UConn is the overwhelming favorite in this tournament, but I'll be honest, I think people are kind of sleeping on Texas.
Experts are suggesting that UCLA is the number 1 challenger to UConn, and that right after that would be Texas. SEC is so deep and so thick in just about everything. It really is annoying. So it's UCLA, Texas, South Carolina, LSU. Only ones that could possibly upset UConn.
On Flagrant and Funny, we're giving our unfiltered takes on the biggest moments, the conversations everyone's having.
So whether your bracket is busted or you just want the latest on the tournament, we got you. Listen to Flagrant and Funny with Carrie Champion and Jamel Hill on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Presented by Capital One, founding partner of iHeart Women's Sports.
Jurors had to decide who was the real Paul Stavagnord, a loner who snapped and killed his neighbors Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor, or a peaceful flute-playing mountain man who killed Rick Beery in self-defense.
It was a hotly contested case, and there was a lot of emotion running through it.
Judge Eric Smith presided over the case.
So the whole notion of Mr. Stavanger being this peaceful guy and Mr. Beery being this angry guy was very essential to their case.
Paul Stavagnord testified that Rick Beery caught him having an affair with his wife, and then took out his gun and fired at him. But the bullet hit Debbie by mistake. Paul said he returned fire and killed Rick in self-defense.
They played into this sort of mellow guy in the wilderness, and the flute was a key piece of the picture they painted.
According to Paul, he played his flute for Debbie just before the two of them had sex. And that's when things in the courtroom got even more weird. Paul's lawyer asked the judge to allow Paul to play the song he performed for Debbie.
So the flute playing would play into the effort they were trying to make of him as a peaceful man. And they were certainly allowed to make that argument, just as the defense was allowed up to a point to make the argument that Mr. Beery was a violent man, because it was a self-defense case.
Ultimately, none of the jurors got to hear Paul play his flute, although he did have his courtroom performance.
I decided that that was of utterly no relevance to the jury, but the attorney insisted that he play the flute for the record. So at the end of the trial day one day, I excused the jury, sent them home, and then had him play the flute. And I will tell you, he was really good. He was really good.
Relatives of Rick and Debbie were furious that Paul was allowed to play the flute. It probably felt really inconsequential and performative. So they got up and walked out of the courtroom. Meanwhile, Paul's supporters sat and listened.
The environment was tense, and the tension was palpable.
Assistant District Attorney Bill Estelle.
The families of Rick Beery and Debbie Rehor were there throughout, and they were living through the nightmare. And on the other side were the people that were there to support Stavagnord because they believed in him.
During closing arguments, prosecutors admitted They didn't know the exact reason why Paul Stavignord killed Debbie Rehor and Rick Beery, but they were certain he did it.
He just decided that he was going to take things not just from Rick Beery's cabin, but take his wife, take his life, and take everything he had.
After 2 long months, it was up to the jurors to decide who the real Paul Stavignord was.
Well, you're always nervous because you have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt.
And keep in mind, the jury never heard about Paul Stavignord's previous crimes, including his 1971 bank heist.
They weren't familiar with the fact that he was a bank robber, that he had a violent past.
3 days passed before the jury handed Judge Eric Smith their verdict.
Mr. Stavignord was convicted of murder in the first degree for killing Mr. Beery and murder in the first degree for killing Ms. Rehor.
The jury found Paul Stavignord guilty on the 2 biggest charges, but acquitted him of sexual assault. One of the jurors told a local reporter that he found Paul Stavignord to be evasive and unbelievable on the stand. On his sentencing day, Paul Stavignord had the opportunity to address the court.
It's called the right of allocution, and I was very curious what his allocution was going to be. So when I asked him if he wanted to say anything, he said, and I believe this is all he said, "You have convicted an innocent man." I kind of expected, given the nature of the tragedy, that he would have shown some remorse or some sorrow or some recognition about what an awful thing that had happened. And he didn't. And I sentenced him to 99 years on each count. And then I made those sentences consecutive.
The judge wanted to make sure Paul Stavignord would never experience freedom again. Even 99 years concurrently would make that true. But Judge Smith wanted to make a point.
I don't think there was any other appropriate sentence.
Assistant DA Bill Estelle.
I think it was a foregone conclusion that he would get the maximum sentence on each count because it was just malice aforethought. I believe Judge Smith, in his remarks, made it very clear that they all suffered and that the sentence should reflect that.
But this case didn't end there.
In my opinion, this is a travesty of justice.
That's Paul's friend, Keith Beha.
I read somewhere that the initial vote of the jury was 9-3. So there were some of the jurors who weren't convinced that first-degree murder was the appropriate charge.
A local newspaper report backed up that story. But ultimately, the jury voted unanimously to convict Paul. However, the case had a new development about the murder weapon, which could change everything.
Well, after the trial and the conviction, Paul went to the judge with the allegation that he had used a rifle, not a pistol, to return fire. The prosecution was focused on this Jennings pistol, which incidentally is a low-quality pistol, as the murder weapon. Paul had told him he had a rifle that day, the Marlin rifle. That was the weapon that he returned fire with, not that junk pistol. But the attorneys chose to have Paul testify that he used the Jennings pistol, and he did, against his better judgment.
In other words, Paul claimed he used a rifle to shoot and kill Rick Beery, but his lawyer said he used a pistol. So which weapon was the murder weapon?
His attorneys, gave him bad advice about testifying about his use of a pistol.
Making things even more confusing, during the trial, the prosecutors argued the murder weapon still had not been found.
None of that made any sense to me.
After his conviction, Paul Stavignord's attorney asked to withdraw from the case. They cited a total breakdown in their attorney-client relationship. Then, Paul petitioned the court for hearing, where he would tell the court where to find the rifle.
And he drew a diagram of where the rifle could be recovered. And the diagram was given to the troopers. The troopers went there and did recover the rifle.
All of that turned the case upside down and led to more hearings.
After Mr. Stavengerd was convicted, he made a claim that he had been ineffectively assisted by his attorneys.
Judge Eric Smith listened as Paul attacked his defense team.
Put simply, Mr. Stavengerd requested a new trial because he argued that his attorneys made him lie. I had an extended evidentiary hearing to determine whether, in fact, the attorneys had provided ineffective assistance of counsel.
2 years after Paul Stavengerd was convicted, the two defense attorneys who originally represented Paul stood in front of Judge Smith. They defended themselves against allegations that they ignored evidence and forced Paul to lie on the stand. His former lawyers fought back and told Judge Smith they weren't the problem. It was Paul's persistent dishonesty, and Paul's new lawyer wanted a do-over.
They filed a motion for new trial, arguing that his attorneys had convinced him to make this story up, and I denied that motion. I found that his attorneys had done a fully adequate job. He had highly competent attorneys at all stages of this, both the two that represented him initially and then the public defender agency when they took it over.
But still, Judge Smith said his decision was a close call. Today, Paul Stavengerd remains in prison, and all these years later, people still wonder what really happened over Memorial Day 1997. Was Paul Stavengerd a cold-blooded murderer? Or did the finding of that rifle mean an entirely different story had unfolded in the woods? Here's Paul's friend, Keith Beha.
That appeal was denied, and that's the end of it. What's happened has happened, and that can't be changed. Paul's a friend, has been a friend, still is a friend. I'd like to see him released, and if somehow that could happen, I'd do everything I could to help him get situated in a positive situation.
Here's author Robin Barefield.
Paul Stavengerd is probably what people think of when they think of a loner living in the Alaska wilderness. I think it was a case of Paul Stavengerd probably spending too much time in the wilderness with his own thoughts. And I think it was just a matter of him snapping. And this would not be the first time or the last time in Alaska that a loner snapped and started killing people.